I'm Steve from Lily Wild, and I'm here with
Ian Steele
and
Steve Jones.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks very much. So we're actually on Treflach Farm, and this video is one of a small number of videos we're making looking at permaculture and farming. Ian, you're the farmer at Treflach Farm. Can you just give us a very quick summary of the farm?
Yeah, of course. So, fourth generation family farm, outdoor pigs, free range cattle, upland farming. So we've got 40 hectares, 100 acres of predominantly unimproved grassland. We do have some improved grassland. We've got some arable, about 8 acres a year for barley and peas grown together, which we use, which whole crop for the pigs. The cattle are pasture finished, so grass only, no grains. We've got a bakery on the farm where we make pies out of the meat from our own animals, and then we run a community interest company where we provide horticultural projects for a wide range of user groups as well. So a busy little place.
And how big's the farm, Ian?
It's 40 hectares,
40
which is
hectares.
approximately 100 acres.
Right, and we're actually on the Wales-England border here, so we're actually just on the English side.
That's right, that's right.
But I understand you also do some work with on your supply chains into Wales as well.
That's right. When you live in the marches on the borderlands like we do, it's very difficult to tease apart the two areas. So it's a very flexible and fluid situation where we supply shops and customers over in Wales, and we're supplied by other primary producers in Wales, but then we also, so it's backwards and forwards, and it's very permeable, this sort of area. There's no real distinction. It's not like you've got to have a passport or anything to be able to get goods across the border. Yeah. So no customs yet between England and Wales. So yeah, it's a really interesting mix of producers that you get in this part of the world.
Well, I want to come back to a little bit more about this here. I'm going to come to Steve, but just to throw in a little bit of an extra. I know also that you're not only a primary producer, but also you then process and sell on to retail.
That's
so
right.
You've got quite a number, and to some extent I understand you also distribute to other retailers.
That's right. So we've had to diversify, and I guess this is something that Steve will come on to with regard to permaculture as well. But when I moved back to the farm, because I lived away for a few years working in construction, my father was a dairy farmer here on Treflach Farm, had been for many years. When I moved back, that really wasn't sustainable as a long-term future for the farm. So what I did was I set up a food business because we were a primary producer of meat with Dad's suckler herds. So the bull, the cows, the calves. We were selling the animals through the livestock market, but that wouldn't sustain me and my family as well as my dad and my mum. Unfortunately, my dad passed away, but we couldn't go back into milk. We had to diversify. So we went into meat production, start off with sausages, bacon, that sort of thing, as farmers are encouraged to do because they've got good quality meat available. They've got the grass to grow as well. But then we found that the margin was so tight, we had to move up the value chain. So we started adding more value we started out with the joints of meat, but then we went to sausages and bacon, but then we went to baked goods, so pies, pasties, sausage rolls, quiches, that sort of thing. And then we tried to work out who was our market. We started out literally on market stalls, farmers markets and general markets. But we found that we really couldn't sell enough in our local area because we're so rural. There's lots of people doing very similar things around here. So we had to broaden our range, broaden our market appeal. And then we did that by going into wholesale, start off with, selling to small independent retailers, both locally and a bit further afield as well. We did grow to supply one multiple, but after a bit of a trial with those guys, after about 18 months, 2 years, we realised we just weren't suited, and we parted as friends. We'd gone back to supplying independent retailers. But what we did find was that in the process, there are lots of small producers like Treflach Farm around in this area who all struggle to get their products to market. So what we did, we started up a small distribution business, a chilled distribution business. We worked with other small producers, collecting their items and taking them to retailers, but then and both locally and down south into London and the home counties. We also found small producers in the home counties who were looking to make use of the backhaul and to be able to use the space in the vans to bring products back from London and the home counties back up into the northwest and Midlands and North Wales. So we set up a small distribution business. At the peak we were running 6 vans, had 4 employees doing the driving, and in the bakery 4 or 5 people in the bakery and in the office, and we were quite a busy little enterprise. Then we had some issues with something called a global pandemic. I don't know. So let's put the kibosh on a few bits and pieces. Right. We have brought things right down. Staff furloughed, vans parked up, numbers of pies we're selling is right down. So there's been some trouble, some struggles over the last few months. And actually, it's given us time and pause for thought about really where we want to be. and actually going forward, we might actually look very different to where we've been in the past. But one of the interesting things I find when I bring people onto the farm, that one of the interesting things I like to tell people, I get people to look around at the different construction methodologies, the different materials that are used in the farm, the different way the land has been used, wood, pasture improved, arable, whatever. The farm is a living, breathing entity. It's never been just one thing. My dad was a dairy farmer. His uncle before him had free-range chickens. You know, and before him, and before him, and before him, the land is living with us and is working with us, and we're working with the land. I'm very conscious of being a custodian, but I am also conscious that the things I'm doing now, like the bakery, will not be necessarily what the next person does. And actually it's more about looking after the farm and leaving it in a good condition so that the next person has the opportunity to make it what they see it should be and what the land actually lends itself towards.
So picking straight up on that, Steve, so you do permaculture teaching at Sector 39.
Yeah.
How did you get involved in Treflach? Because it sounds like a pretty complicated space to get involved in.
Well, actually, Ian came on one of our courses. He dropped in on part of it. We were doing a weekend forest gardening course.
Introduction to permaculture. The
Yeah, well,
workhouse.
introduction. Okay, yeah,
it was,
sorry.
it was.
Yeah. Thank you.
So he was lost and he saw...
Well, we're looking, we had a mutual friend who said,
Yeah.
you know, there's a chance to get some ideas and trade ideas. And was something about what we were talking about that resonated with you instantly.
Massively, straight away.
It was like, oh, we're on the same page here. I come from a farming background. My family were tenant farmers. We lost that tenancy a long time ago now. But I've sort of got it in my blood. So again, can kind of understand the issues and the things that Ian might be struggling with. Being of a certain size, you're pushed into one or two directions. Is you either have to expand and specialise in one thing and do it at scale, which means a lot of capital investment, and a lot of farms have just lost control of the, as well, you know.
Working for the bank.
You're working for the bank.
Working for the bank.
You're working for the bank. And then the other thing is, okay, so you specialise, you diversify, you find little niche markets. We were chatting last night. As a farmer, spend most of your time marketing, packaging, you know, doing
web design, just very little time actually farming. So that can be quite a struggle when you go in that end.
In permaculture, we embrace diversity. You know, permaculture is about reflecting the natural world that we see around us. The natural world is complex, diverse, interconnected. It isn't huge 40-hectare fields of a single crop. We never see that. But consequently, we're still learning how you scale that up and how you operate that. What we realise that diversity gives you strength, diversity gives you resilience and efficiencies, but it also then, it can get too complicated. And then it's like this juggling act and you drop one of the balls and suddenly, you know, you don't know where you're at. So it needs a pioneering time.
So does that put a lot of tension on you, Ian? Do you find that you're just, oh my God, what the hell do I do today?
It's not what do I do today, it's what thing do I do first.
Yeah.
So there's so many exciting and interesting things that we can do and we are doing, and permaculture gives us a structure to be able to approach those interesting and exciting things.
Right.
And so I'm amazingly grateful for that as a framework to work with. But one of the things is, like Steve was saying, when you diversify, you've really got to be careful that you don't become a jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah.
You've still got to keep a focus on what your knitting is and
What your
sticking
primary
to it,
functions are.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So we've been having this.
Yeah.
We came here the first time, I think it was like September 10 years ago. And so we've kind of been having this conversation for 10 years.
The last decade.
Yeah, and seeing how the farm's evolved. And we've had it in the company of a great many people, very, you know, some absolute novices, some very experienced people. And it's been interesting, you know, to paraphrase. But also, it's, you know, it's this enormous time we're in transition that we're at. We're trying to transition away from maybe too much monoculture, too much use of petrochemicals. We're trying to embrace more, you know, ecological ways of behaviour. Ian's also thinking about the social side, though. You know, there's a social responsibility side to farming, and about building relationships with customers, building relationships with the communities, and also making people connect with, you know, with the soil, with where food comes from. You know, and it's the world of supermarkets.
And empowering them as well,
Yes,
so they actually feel like they're making a difference. When they see where food's coming from, actually their buying choices are making a difference. And their buying choices are making a difference with regard to the environmental challenges that we as a species face. A lot of people can feel overwhelmed by the climate crisis that we face. Actually, being able to shop somewhere local and buy a grass-fed beef joint is making a consumer decision which is having a direct impact on the release, or actually on this farm's case, the sequestration of carbon into the soil.
Absolutely. And Steve, I know at the moment you're actually filming a permaculture course right here, live streaming and all sorts because of the current situation. But
Obviously,
yeah, 10 years on, I mean, are you seeing many differences here on the farm? Are you seeing how those permaculture principles are being applied in a different way, or are you seeing a very complicated, interesting farm system?
Yeah, it's changed loads. It really has. It's changed a lot. And not just the physical, this building was here 10 years ago and it will be here in 10 years' time, hopefully. But in other ways, yeah, it's changed enormously. And as much as it's to do with the attitudes and the engagement. So the way that I think it's most changed is, I think when we came here 10 years ago, Ian was here pretty much by himself with a shed full of machines and a head full of ideas.
Yeah.
And very few opportunities. He had other people working alongside him, but he didn't have the opportunity to download those ideas, to work on them, develop them, and then suddenly by hosting
And
these...
structure them as well.
Yes,
Right.
yes, get them into sequence. You can sit and have a look, oh, we could do this, or we could do that. That's just daydreaming, really. So permaculture is very practical, sequential. What are we going to do first? We'll do survey, we'll gather the information, work out what our objectives are, break those objectives down into steps, and we'll start working our way through it. And that was the bit that perhaps Ian hadn't had the opportunity to sort of unpack and explore. It's having all these sorts driving up and down EM6 or whatever it is, wherever you've been going. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that was suddenly that touch point. And what we realised on that very first PDC was you need some people here, and you need much more engagement, interactions with other people, perhaps with different specialisms, different perspectives. And that was the process really that started to sort of unpick.
So that's something I just want to pick up on, and I'm conscious, we could talk for hours.
And often do.
But I think that there's something I think is really interesting, and that is taking what you've both been going through and learning here. Are there any key things that if you were going to another farm, and potentially one even, you're a relatively small farm,
We are.
a bigger farm, or maybe a much more, even more upland, a mountain farm, are there things that we could take? And one of the things that is really striking me is this thing about bringing people in.
Yep.
And we've tended to sort of keep people out, and it's almost like you've gone the opposite direction to the trend, brought people in back into that space.
And consciously
our
so
rural
as well.
communities used to be more like that, didn't they? I mean, our farms used to be much busier, we had more people on them, and you've kind of re-engaged that. Are there any other things that you think, if we're going into another space, another farm, here's some of the big lessons?
Well, I mean, Steve is a permaculture teacher, but every tenet of permaculture is directly applicable to any amount of ground, any space you look at, whether it's a window pot, or a planter, right up to landscape scale. And it was really, really simple to take the permaculture design methodology and apply it to Treflach Farm, because but then you could also apply it to the wetlands on Treflach Farm, or you can apply it to the woodland on Treflach Farm, or you can apply it to the energy management on Treflach Farm, or you can apply it to the animals on Treflach. It's infinitely, you can scale up to any scale you want, and you can scale down to any scale you want.
Yeah, no, it's interesting here, because certainly, I've actually looked at over a number of units as well, a number of farms or a number of areas, and again, like you say, it just automatically very comfortably scales up.
We were invited to, a few years ago, I was invited to a talk in Lincolnshire, to a bunch of farmers.
I remember.
That was interesting. And then afterwards we went and stayed with one of the farmers, and he showed me around his house. I did my kind of permaculture talk and all of that, and then next day they showed me around their farm. And they showed me a 300-acre field, 300 acres, not a single tree, anything in it, and they just grew celeriac. That's it. And I said, I've heard the story, I can't even believe we eat that much celeriac. He said, no, that's the whole UK supply, we grow it. And so I started to think, but obviously, so these guys had invested a lot of money in kit. They had big, I think Ian's barn is big, you should have seen their barn. I think he told me his electricity bill was 140 grand or something like that, a year. So and obviously they probably invested, I don't know, many zeros of dollars into the infrastructure. Dehumidifiers, washers, dryers, packing. You've got to supply the supermarkets all year round, so they've got to do all of those sort of interventions. But even then I started to think, yeah, I could see steps. I could see how you could transition away. Okay, you have to think about how to restructure the loans. I didn't look at the finances of the farm, obviously. We were only there for a day or two. But you think about how you could introduce a agroforestry into those big monoculture fields. You can work out what's the width of your machines. Let's make a multiple of widths, and then let's put in agroforestry strips. Because wherever people do that, soil carbon starts to rise.
Yes.
And they said to me, they were very proud of what they were doing, and said, no, we're feeding Britain and all of this. And the guy admitted to me, though, one of the farm managers, he said, well, I've been here, this was under the wash originally, so we were on sort of virgin silt, reclaimed 35 years ago, so we've lost that much soil. That's not sustainable, is it? I mean, that is not sustainable. And this is some of the best, most productive soil in the UK, and it's disappearing.
So we could be looking, like you say, alley cropping in there, reduce the amount of soil.
Yeah, stepping stones. Let's just start bringing in diversity, bringing in edges, creating wildlife corridors through it. Start actually thinking about how we could, create some niches for some other, or other creatures to come in, or other plants, and think about how that then might interact with the rest of the farm and the rest of the crop, and broaden out. You realise your only objective isn't produce or die, and maybe it is in that economic environment, and I might be very naive by saying this, but hang on a minute, if it's produce or die and lose your soil, then you're just dying slowly, aren't you? So these are the things we've got to get out of, and I think the Ministry of Agriculture, or the various authorities should be looking at this as a long-term structural problem. We need to sort of get out of a really horrible trap that we've got ourselves in. And in the UK, we're addicted to cheap food, right? We all like our baked beans and stuff like that, and we don't want to pay very much for it. But for that food, we don't see where it comes from. We don't see the footprint. We don't get any feedback. We don't have any relationship to the food. I don't know what baked beans are. I forgot. I mean, I'm kind of joking, really, but you know what I mean? We don't have any connection to that. This is different what he's doing, and he's building a community through relationships, through the products and services of the farm. And I think it's awesome. And we did 4 or 5 courses here back in sort of spread over 2 or 3 years. You were on one of them. And we visited and everything, stayed in touch. This is the first time we've come back and done a full course again. So it's like this kind of, chapter into the next, we're very much into the next phase. Yeah. And obviously we mentioned the virus, C19, whatever, the disease that is, but it is a watershed. In many ways, it's a watershed for a certain kind of society, a certain kind of set of behaviours. We factor that in with our climate change commitments, with the Paris targets. These are things we have to do. These are non-negotiable. So, again, there's your watershed. There's your time to start moving perhaps in other directions towards other objectives that include health, well-being, people's mental health, and access to the countryside, and then building relationships so that people can get involved in farms. To think, future generations will laugh. People used to drive in cars to go to a gym to run on a stationary, conveyor belt. What's that about? There's something really deeply failing. That's I don't know. Obviously, there's reasons why we do that, but it just seems bizarre to me when there's so many things to be done, so many really meaningful, uplifting things to be done, just by interacting with
other people and the natural landscape.
And that's exactly that.
So we've got a really interesting space here at Treflach where you've got more people coming back onto the farm, you've got more happening. I know that you're producing all sorts of interesting, good quality food goods, and you're recreating those linkages with people and the place that supplies them with their food, using the principles and the structures that permaculture provides. So, an interesting case study. Thanks very much for helping out with this, guys.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Steve, Sector 39, permaculture trainer.
Good question, Steve. Thanks for that.
Right.
Good, thanks for the plug.
And thanks to Ian, Treflach Farm,
Yeah.
and I'm looking forward to a pie.
Let's go and have a bite to eat.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Nice one.
Cheers.
Guys.